So, feet about hip width apart. Remembering you can measure this from the outside of your foot for a slightly narrower stance, or the midline, or as I tend to do, from the inside of the foot. Just find what's comfortable for you and turning from the center of your body. So just thinking about structure and really its relationship to movement. Not just the movement that you see, but the movement that you feel. So if you like, the choreography of the exercises, but also the energy that runs through them. And really, we can't distinguish between, we can't put a space between the significance of structure and the significance of movement. They're very much interdependent. And in particular, I think the movement comes from the structure. But it can also be an indication of whether your structure is appropriate or not. So you're experienced enough at this to have a sense for what this can feel like. It won't be like that right at the start, because you've only just started, and you need to give yourself, those moments of just settling in mind and body, bringing your awareness into the movement, completes the sort of trinity, body, mind, and energy. So, for instance, the rhythm of the movement is something that will be aided by good structure, but it's also something that increases our awareness of movement in one way or another, and connection. And connection is another thing that we need the connection to get the quality of movement, but it's hard to get that without the structure, and so on and so forth. But just have a look down. You should be able to see your toes poking out beyond your knees. Knees roughly above the balls of your feet, and this dropping back without pushing the knees forward. So what I've been saying to people sometimes is that when I'm like this and I go to here, the angle that my shin bone makes doesn't change. It probably does a little bit, to be honest. And this shouldn't be a rigid thing. The idea being to find ways to encourage people to avoid this, basically. You see my knees overhanging, and now if I do this, I'm kind of throwing my whole body out. It's too much. Just turning from this middle part of the body, trying to keep your knees in line with your toes, which requires this regular adjustment. So normally when we start to turn, this happens. You see my knees swinging around, they get pulled over, but also pulled back. Same thing. So we make the movements to counteract that. If I do this, and it's particularly my left leg, that's the one on your right, I kind of circle it out, bring it back into position. That requires the muscles on the outside of the thigh to contract, the muscles on the inside of the thigh to stretch out. And you just have to keep doing that until you can maintain the position of the knees. Well-known American Tai Chi player called Peter Ralston, who's very into the whole internal power thing. He wrote a sort of classic text called Fu Shi, the way of internal power. And in that book, he said that in order to deliver power, strength, to push or something like that, you needed to stretch on the inside of the leg, which amounts to the same thing. Because if I say go to do this and my leg collapses, I've broken the connection from the ground to the palm of the hand. And that connection is really important for the power of the push. But I think it's a mistake just to think in terms of power, because partly because of the connotations that we have with things like power, strength. So remember, though, the internal strength is actually different to how we normally think of strength. So this is a powerful movement, but a very smooth one and a very connected one. And it's really about maintaining the connection. If I go to pick something up, a cup or something like that, and I'm not used to keeping that connection, and even that becomes a strain on the body. As I turn, I can feel big muscles going up and down and around the back. When I turn this way, there are certain lines of extension, certain lines of contraction, but then the extended areas contract and pull me the other way. So you can feel the dynamic of the movement. And different times you'll feel it in different ways. It depends just where the focus of your attention is. Excuse me, I'm going to sneeze. And likewise up between your shoulder blades and in your sides. Your arms hanging from your shoulders, and see if you can feel a little bit of movement in the shoulder socket. And to get a better sense of what's happening in your arms, you use the image of moving through water. And that gradually pushes the body into a more connected, more deliberate movement. So again, as you go through water, as you go through air, this would happen. The arms are quite floppy, but then they're not going to be able to do that in water. And if I want them to maintain a particular pathway, then if I was in water and I did this, then the water would hold my arm back. But I want to feel those connections from my body to my arm, but I don't want to stiffen up. Your head with this one, so you can do one of two things. You can let your head move, as I am at the moment. The problem with that is that if your eyes are open, then there's a risk that you get a kind of blur in front of you. You could always close your eyes. Or you can keep your head still and let your body move underneath. Both are perfectly valid. The problem with this one is that this is the equivalent of turning your head suddenly. And what you don't want to do is to tighten your neck. So be careful with that. So I tend to start off with this. I'm kind of looking around, eyes projected into the mid-distance, especially if you do this outside, you've usually got somewhere you can be looking to. And then when I've warmed up, I'll keep my head still a few times. Now remember, this exercise sometimes referred to as knocking at the gate of life. Gate of life being an acupuncture point round about here in the middle of the small of the back called Ming Meng. It translates as the gate of life. In practice, I find my hand tends to fall there rather than there. I guess you could deliberately do that, but this kind of action on the spine will very gently shake the spine, and you're only just below the gate of life. You're only just below Ming Meng. So it will stimulate the energy up the spine. And then just bouncing a little bit. This generally requires a bit of practice, I think. soften your knees, springy feeling developing in your legs and feeling the shaking going up the spine. And then if you can do both at the same time, just letting your elbows bend. And then down again. And then hands on the lower part of your back, elbows dropping down. I don't know if you can see from there, come a bit closer again. Yeah, well, it's not that obvious actually. I can feel my shoulders shaking, my shoulder blades bouncing up and down a little bit. We use shaking movements in Chinese medicine to release what is often referred to as stagnation. Just let your hands drop, your hips drop back, your hands come out, and then yeah. I think stagnation is it's quite a picturesque term. I think it sums up the feeling you can get sometimes. I have somewhere a book of what is described as Taoist exercises, where they use the phrase that a moving river doesn't stagnate. And that tells you quite a lot about how Tai Chi functions in the context of Chinese medicine. Okay, and then just letting your hands drop down. Another thing we want to try and do is and this is very much an image. You imagine holding a ball underneath your arm in the armpit, or something like a golf ball or something like that. You don't want the arm sort of like collapsed against the side of the body, because there's no energy in them. On the other hand, you don't want to do this, because obviously that's to strengthen them. So you imagine the ball. It's almost like somebody's taken hold of your arm with one hand and just gently press on your shoulder with the other hand, something we do in Chinese massage, and just pulled slightly. And if you can imagine in the shoulder joint, the ball of the bone is in the socket, and it's like you've just gently drawn them away, still very much in the socket. And of course, there should be, in a sense, a space between the humerus and the socket itself, and that space is filled by the synovial fluid and the synovial membrane. So that's another thing you start to imagine. When we go through the different exercises, all the time we do that. So this, if we did this, we would drop the ball. If we did that, we would be crushing the ball. So we keep that sense of a kind of rounded quality there. And another rounded quality is over the legs. The groin is said to have a kind of rounded quality rather than too tight or too sort of stiff, too square. There was a name for that. I can't remember the name offhand, but there was a name for that. So these are things that we want to try and maintain as we go through the different exercises. You imagine a little ball, sort of soft ball tucked in behind your knee, in front of your ankle, in front of your hips as well. I sometimes use the image of the one underneath the arm as like an egg, because you don't want to crush the egg, but you don't want to drop it either. So just whatever image suits you. And your chin pulling back, so you raise the ridge of bone at the top of the head. And again, it's almost like you just tuck the ball in there. Don't look down. And this last one will actually just begin to help to lengthen the spine as it goes into into your neck. So it's worthwhile spending some time standing in this position just to familiarize yourself with these ideas. Front of the body hangs down from the back so that the muscles of your abdomen and chest are active. They're not just, they haven't just given up, but they're not stiff and tight. You're certainly not pulling your belly in. Breathing as though your lungs were down in your belly. And I think a couple of weeks ago, maybe a week ago with this class, I did that little exercise with the breathing. You may just feel the slight rise and fall with the in breath and out breath in that area, sort of just below your navel. Probably feel it much more in the solar plexus, but have the idea that you're going to start here in the belly. Sinking down and pushing up. So it's quite challenging to try and maintain these different qualities while you're in movement. So when we come up, for instance, here, don't do this. Remember, you've got a little ball tucked in behind your knee, holding a little ball here on each hip. Bringing your hands around to here, and it's important that we don't do this because we drop the ball. So you push up, and we feel the expansion, particularly in the belly, and then down. Going through into the belly that represent the area of the lower dantian. You want to follow the breathing. It's in breath as you push up, out breath as you sink down. But as always, don't be fanatical about keeping to a breathing pattern. Remind yourself of it every now and then, and you'll be fine. There are other things to concern yourself with as well. And in particular, I think this sense of where we feel the movement within the body. And there's two aspects to that. There's an underlying thing of, the whole body is part of the movement in one way or another. But laid on top of that, like a map where somebody's drawn certain pathways, are the individual patterns associated with each exercise. Now change into the wild goose. I'd emphasize that you're not trying to impose anything here. So don't think this is where I should feel the movement, even if it's different to how you felt it last time you did it. What you'll find is even if it feels a bit off, it will sort itself out. So here we feel the expansion in the belly and then up into the solar plexus. And then heart in the clouds, belly, solar plexus, and then higher up, upper part of your chest up into your head, which would be the upper dantian. once more. And then putting the three together, balancing or harmonizing the three dantians, lower, expanding and contracting. And then the middle, but feeling it first in the lower and then feeling the expansion. And maybe just coming forward slightly and exaggerated slightly there, your heels coming up. Not if you're wobbling around, though, don't lose the fluidity of the movement. Then lower, middle, and upper. Different qualities of movement in each area. The lower dantian is the home of what is referred to as the Jing. And confusingly, the middle dantian, the Qi, and then the upper dantian, the Shen. The Jing, the densest of those, what we might think of as our constitutional energy, that which we're born with. When it runs out, we die, we're told. It's a charming thought. And the middle dantian, the Qi, this is sort of like what I think of as a kind of everyday energy, in particular the air we're breathing in, but the food we eat and so on and so forth. And then the Shen is often referred to as the spirit. If you think about something like the way they refine oil into petrol, you know, there's the dark, dense crude oil, which then goes through a process of refining into the petrol, more fluid, lighter, I suppose you could say, and the petrol itself gives off the fumes. But as I said before, sometimes described as the transition from ice to water to steam, whichever way you care to think about it. Or you could just think, you know, kind of like just notice the qualities of the movement. Notice what they have to tell you. One way or another, the idea is to develop that sense of connection and harmony to them. We focus on these different regions of the body, not to fragment the body, but to increase our understanding of that inner landscape and how the different parts of it work together. And then change into dragon plucks the stars from the sky. And one more on each side. and then changing, pushing in 4 directions. And change again. And then it's comfortable adding the turn. When you make the turn, you may actually feel that all the way down the outside of the opposite of the leg that you're turning away from. That relates to that, so keeping the knee in line that I was talking about earlier. It also, interestingly, with this one, gives you more or less the route of one of the major energy channels, the meridian, the gallbladder meridian. Change the other side. And it's possible to use these exercises alongside the route of the major organ meridians. So it can vary which exercise you use. Your intent is important, but 12 of those meridians, I suppose 6 would be the ones that you would really aim for. So there's another way in which links with Chinese medicine. Now add in the turn. Then rowing a boat in the middle of the lake. One more time. And polishing the table. Once more. Now just come back and stand as we did at the beginning. A couple of slow, gentle breaths. And then just shake out. Now you may have noticed some changes, something different between when we were standing before and after we did the exercises. Sometimes there may be physical changes, you know, as you've gone through the movements and, you know, different parts of the body have started working. Other times, and it's a bit difficult to make a distinction to be honest, other times you're simply more aware of what is going on, so that you're noticing more. But you've just done sort of like, what, 15, 20 minutes of exercises, paying attention to what's going on in those exercises. You're bound to be more aware. You know, try going out somewhere, sort of sitting by the sea, or, you know, maybe sitting where there's a few trees or something like that. Sit there for 5 minutes and there'll be some waves and a couple of trees and so on and so forth. Sit there for 10 minutes and you'll notice more. Sit there for half an hour and you'll notice more again, because you'll just be more kind of in tune with what's going on. And it's the same with these exercises. And it's another example of where mind, body and movement, mind, body and energy very much overlap. And I said earlier about the middle Dan Shen being the seat of the Qi. Qi, C-H-I or Q-I, is a term with a multiple range of meanings, shall we say. Context is everything in understanding what Qi means. Qi could be everything. I mean, literally everything, in, you know, everything around us. It could be, in the terms of Chinese medicine, the energy that runs through the meridian system, and that's it. So for some people, that's all it is. I may have said it last week. An early translation of the term is Qi is vital breath. And if they're talking about painting or something like that, they talk about the Qi of the painting. They're talking about something different again, and so on and so forth. I mean, I talked about the Qi here, but I would normally use the term to describe that area or process, if you like, where those three elements of body, mind, and energy overlap. Because I think in the context of Tai Chi, that's how it works best to understand this kind of harmonizing of those three elements. I've got a book somewhere, it's quite a big book, that goes through some of the nuances of the term Qi. About all you can say by the end of it is that it's confusing. There is no definitive explanation, but a relatively recent character for Qi shows a fire with rice being steamed over the fire and the vapor coming off the rice, which, you know, encompasses a great deal of things, way beyond a simple notion of movement or energy. Maybe slightly wider than hip width apart, transferring your weight from side to side. We're going to do stretching between heaven and earth. So when we move across here, I'm trying as much as possible to maintain this upright position. Now, if I grab a stick and if I stand here without moving, then the stick represents the center line, if you like. When I move across, I can only get to about here. I don't know if you can, perhaps the wrong color. I can get to about here. So the stick is not quite over my foot. If I try and get to there, at this point, can you see what it's doing? Even if I adjust my knee, it's throwing everything out. And it's not really until I can step in that I can comfortably get to this position here. And at that point, I would look for the center line to go to about there in the foot, that point just behind the ball of the foot. So at the moment, the reason I got you to step a little bit wider is to accommodate that, because you're only moving to about 60%. And if you're here, then by the time you started, it's time to finish. It's a lot more difficult to make that judgment. Before we go into the actual exercise, let's just take a look at how we get to being completely over one leg. In the first instance, what you want to do is this. Just let the heel come off the ground and the knee go forwards. Now, that's quite important, because what I don't want to do is this. I don't want my shoulder to go up. In fact, my hip will go down because the knee's going forwards. So we drop the hip, and that will in fact push the knee forwards. And that gets you across a little bit more. And then you can step in. So the amount of weight bearing down through the supporting leg just gradually increases. And then, of course, if you want to, you can raise the knee. But again, when you raise the knee, don't lift the hip. Don't do this, because you'll fall over. It's a simple rotation in the hip. It doesn't involve the hip coming up. It involves the ball of the hip joint rotating in the socket like that, not a lifting. And so that, I still talk about the space between the arm and the shoulder socket. Same thing in the leg and the hip. Okay, so come back to a static position, stretching between heaven and earth. First of all, without moving the weight, a little bit of a push up, and then sinking. When I say that the hip doesn't lift, I mean it doesn't lift independently. You can do this exercise with a push up, but not. It's the whole of the pelvis rising as one unit, not just one side. I'll show you more what I mean by that when we get to it. But first of all, the stretching between heaven and earth. Try and turn your hands so the palms are facing upwards towards the heavens, downwards towards the ground, and then they turn in and they meet in front of the belly, sliding past each other. And they remain in front of your body, particularly the upper hand, doesn't go back here. You can see there where my lower hand is, I haven't pulled it behind. So then if you wish, you can start to add in the weight change. So you move across a little bit. So both hips are going to go up together. So the point I made earlier was that we don't want to sort of do this, but we do go up. But if you see, I'm not leaning over, hopefully. And likewise, when I push my knee forwards, I don't do this to raise the heel. But what is happening is the whole of the pelvis is going up and down, but hips remain level. So when I talk about a drop in the hip, it's very much a kind of feeling for that. Same when you step in, raise the knee. And we're not going to completely straighten the supporting leg. Trying not to come straight out of the extension, especially if you've taken one leg up. Well, obviously, if you're feeling wobbly, you're going to have to put the foot down fairly quickly. But look for that slight pause there for a moment. One more on each side. Okay, shake out. So when in that context, when I talk about the hip seeming to drop when we do this, it's more a feeling within the hip than it is a sort of movement of the hip actually physically dropping down. So it's possible, for instance, to both get a sense of pushing up here so that the pelvis is going up and down, and yet at the same time experiencing a sense of dropping through the hip. After all, you've got two forces acting on your body. You've got the pull of gravity and you've got the push up. You could take that even further, that actually when I do this, this is a rotation in the hip joint. So when it rotates, the movement will be here up, but as the ball rotates in the socket, the back of the ball is going to go down. So different ways of actually looking at this. 1 foot forwards. The same thing is true when we take the step in the bow stance. And I'm emphasizing this to emphasize that there is always a downward pull on our hip. There's always an upward push as well. And so when looking to find, once again, a balance, a harmony between those two movements, where sometimes described, I suppose this relates a little bit to the last exercise, as being suspended between heaven and earth. So this another example of the Trinity. We talk about mind, body, energy, three dantians. Another way that is expressed in traditional Chinese thinking is that there's heaven and there's earth, and then human beings stand between them, receiving energy or whatever, however you kind of think about it, from both directions, and blending them in the middle. Heaven has a slightly different context than the Christian heaven, by the way. So just what's above you. So we suspend between, we gather, if you like, we balance between, we harmonize between upward and downward. And we can interpret that very simply in terms of that resistance, resilience of the body to collapsing, and the counterforce, which is the pull of gravity pulling us down. So when I go to raise my front toes, I can imagine somebody comes along and pushes me here. They push into my hip. You can see what my upper body's doing. And if they push hard enough, that will happen. The toes will come up. So you imagine that, but it's much smaller. You don't want to throw the body offline. Similarly here, when I'm here, if I drop my hip deliberately, you see my knee being pushed forward, my heel comes up. So I imagine that working through the body, and the heel comes up. Both of those are quite important ideas, because quite often, almost invariably, when we go to move the foot, we do something like this. It's almost like we're using our shoulder to lift our foot. And then stepping in. So once again, when we do the step in, we see elements of both awareness going on and imagery. We use that awareness to help to refine our structure, but also to identify the various movements, the various energies moving through the body, and in particular, gravity vis-a-vis the resilience of your body. And they're all significant factors in being able to take this very simple step. And then on the other side, transferring your weight. And then raising your toes and your heel. And then stepping in. And taking a few steps. And then back in the other direction. Okay. So sink back, hands on your belly. Let's do pigeon spreads its wings. Belly expanding, solar plexus, chest. And maybe as you go forward with an in-breath, feeling the movement through those three regions, lower, middle, and upper down chair. Or at least feeling that at the front, because there's a slight kind of contraction in the back. And then fisherman cast the net. Again, imagine doing this in water, and although your arms aren't straining against the water, you do need to find a way, or your body needs to find a way, to be more precise, to maintain the pattern. And then pushing away. And then on the other side. And where your weight is moving, so the weight is a primary driving force here, back leg, front leg. That should feel like a big sort of wave coming up from your leg. And then fisherman cast the net. And pushing away. One more time. And bring it back. Shake out. Good. As always, rubbing your hands together. Lightly tapping over your face. over your head and neck. Shoulder and your arm. The other side. Push your back. And around your hips. The legs. Slightly underbelly. Sinking down. Embrace tiger, return to mountain. And again, we have those opposite forces. And one of the ways that we approach this, and from a point of view of harmonizing them, is to recognize how their, if you like, their relative strengths change. Here, the springiness, the resilience of your body is quite strong, but it gradually fades away. And that's when gravity overcomes it and we pull down. But as you sink down, it's like pushing on a spring. The harder you push down, the stronger the push up. It's important that in both directions, we're aware of the point of change so that we don't overdo it. You can overwind the spring. You can strain against the pull of gravity. That is not the idea. It's that area in the middle, again, you know, heaven, earth, human, in that human area. We look for the harmony, not fighting against either of those forces. The idea that's reflected in the martial element in Tai Chi. The yang changes to yin, yin changes to yang. And you know, if you think about the Tai Chi diagram, the yin-yang diagram, you'll see it's a kind of visual representation of that sort of dynamic. In part it is. One more time. And check out. Brilliant. Thank you very much. So